When Princess Anne overheard hushed voices in a corridor of Windsor Castle, she thought little of it, until one name stopped her in her tracks. Charlotte. What began as a fleeting suspicion quickly unraveled into a disturbing discovery that left the Princess Royal visibly shaken. A mother's instinct wasn't guiding her, this time it was something far more terrifying. A sense that history was repeating itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began with a murmur, two staffers whispering in a tone too careful to ignore. Anne, never one to eavesdrop without cause, caught a single jarring phrase. She won't question it. Charlotte trusts her already. The words struck her like a cold gust of wind. She paused, hidden from sight, her heart pounding. There was a tone of orchestration, of something being deliberately arranged, and the mention of her young grandniece sent alarm bells ringing in her head. When she later asked one of the aides about it directly, she was met with a dismissive smile. "Oh, nothing to worry about," they said. But Anne knew better. That phrase had become a red flag inside the palace, a blanket used to cover too many secrets. The dismissiveness only deepened her suspicion, and from that moment forward, Anne couldn't let it go. As the days passed, she began connecting dots that no one else seemed to see or refused to acknowledge. She thought of the subtle shifts she'd witnessed. Charlotte no longer attending morning outings with Catherine, a once inseparable mother-daughter bond, now constantly interrupted by engagements mysteriously placed in Charlotte's schedule. She remembered Diana. She remembered the silencing, the reshaping, the behind-the-scenes reassignments that had hurt the family in ways never spoken of aloud. Anne felt that same chill, again. She had vowed to never let such manipulation touch another generation. Not under her watch, driven by instinct and haunted by regret, Anne quietly began watching. Not in a grand way, but through the eyes of those who spoke freely to her, the unguarded voices of gardeners, footmen, tutors, those overlooked by the higher tiers of power, but who always noticed when something wasn't quite right. What she uncovered was subtle, yet troubling. Charlotte was being guided, redirected, placed in the care of individuals Anne had never seen before, people not connected to Catherine's circle, but rather to Camilla's. The revelation struck Anne with force. She couldn't understand the purpose yet, but the pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't neglect. This was intentional. Anne's concern grew heavier with every unanswered question. When she tried to speak to William, he seemed absorbed in his own challenges, distracted by state duties and unspoken tensions with his father. Charles, meanwhile, listened with a practiced calmness, but gave nothing in return, no assurance, no concern, only the standard palace deflection. It's all being managed. Anne. But Anne knew that language. She had heard it too often in the past, and she had seen what managed meant in royal terms: silenced, hidden, or buried. Back in her private quarters, she retrieved something she hadn't touched in years, a sealed envelope marked only with her initials. She had written it during a different royal crisis, one that never came to light. Its contents were prepared for a moment she had hoped would never come. But now, her fingers hovered over it, trembling slightly. The weight of responsibility pressed down hard. She prayed she wouldn't have to open it. But just as Anne begins to trace the outlines of the plot, a chilling encounter confirms her worst fears. From playful confidence to quiet unease, those close to Princess Charlotte had begun to notice subtle shifts in her demeanour, yet no one could quite place the cause. Was it just growing pains, or the shadow of something far more calculated and sinister? At first, it was just little things. Charlotte no longer bounced into rooms with the same carefree energy. Her laughter, once effortless, now felt rehearsed, polite rather than joyful. Long conversations with Catherine were replaced by vague nods and one-word answers. Palace staff who had seen her grow since birth whispered among themselves there was a coldness now, something hollow in her interactions. Catherine, always attuned to her children, grew increasingly unsettled, but every time she raised concern, the answer was the same from advisors and aides alike. It's normal. She's maturing. Let her be. Yet that didn't sit right. Not with a mother who had been watching her daughter evolve day after day. and certainly not with Anne, who had grown more suspicious by the hour. Then came the appointment that shifted the palace's atmosphere entirely. A new governess, introduced with glowing recommendations and an immaculate resume. Her arrival was abrupt, and her proximity to Charlotte immediate. Those who questioned the speed of her integration were met with stone-faced explanations. She had been personally endorsed by a close associate of Camilla. That alone sent alarms ringing through Anne's mind. Quietly, the Princess Royal began making inquiries of her own, using her decades of palace experience to peel back layers no one else dared touch. What she uncovered was not overtly damning, but troubling nonetheless. Small gaps in the governess's work history, a previous role abruptly ended, a reference that no longer responded to calls. But what truly unsettled Anne was how quickly the governess became Charlotte's primary guide, emotionally, educationally, and even ideologically. Charlotte began repeating peculiar phrases. "I have a duty to something greater than myself. My future isn't about childhood." Words far too heavy for a girl her age, and they didn't come from Catherine. Anne later learned that the governess had been slipping these ideas into Charlotte's reading, her conversations, her routines. Bit by bit, Charlotte was being shaped, not nurtured, molded into something someone else envisioned. And someone very specific seemed to be orchestrating the transformation. Camilla had been spotted in a closed-door meeting with the governess. No aides, no explanations, just a private conversation that lasted nearly an hour, with Charlotte waiting just outside the room when it ended. That wasn't ordinary. It wasn't acceptable. It was a move Anne couldn't overlook. Determined to protect the young princess, Anne begins a desperate quest for answers and allies. In the regal halls where crowns weigh heavy and grudges run deep, a silent war was brewing between two royal women. Anne had once tolerated Camilla's rise, but what she uncovered now ignited a fury that could no longer be hidden. Anne didn't hesitate. With a sense of restrained fury and aching urgency, she confronted Camilla directly behind the thick walls of Clarence's house. The meeting was tense from the moment Anne stepped into the room. Her voice was sharp but composed, demanding answers about Charlotte's sudden behavioral changes, the obscure background of the new governess, and Camilla's unexplained involvement in her niece's upbringing. Camilla, unflinching, responded with a calm veneer that only fueled Anne's anger. "We are simply shaping her understanding of what's ahead," she said. "It's about future-proofing the monarchy, nothing more." But Anne knew this wasn't just about roles or responsibilities. It was about control. Camilla's words were calculated, her tone confident, almost dismissive. It was as if she believed this plan had already taken root too deeply to be undone. The confrontation quickly turned personal. Old wounds reopened like torn pages from a royal manuscript. Anne, never one to mince her words, reminded Camilla of her place, how she had entered this family through scandal, not lineage. Camilla, with a smirk that masked venom, retorted with something that chilled Anne to her core. "You never understood the crown's survival depends on adaptability. Loyalty must be redirected when necessary, even within the family." It wasn't just deflection, it was confirmation. Something deeper was at play. Anne felt the undertones. She wasn't merely witnessing a misstep in parenting, she was watching the calculated redirection of a future queen's compass, a distortion of identity under the guise of duty. Threatening to bring everything to Catherine, Anne stood firm, but Camilla's response was swift and weaponized. "If you involve her," she warned, "you'll destabilize the unity we've built. The public won't see a concerned aunt, they'll see division. And you know the monarchy cannot afford fractures now." It was a thinly veiled threat, one that placed the institution above the well-being of a child, one that echoed closely the justifications made during darker chapters of royal history. The language was familiar. Terms like image, balance, and sacrifice had always been used to explain away harm. But amid Camilla's rhetoric, one term stood out: the Windsor shift. She mentioned it almost casually, like a known internal strategy, a quiet plan whispered only among a select few. Anne didn't yet know what it fully meant, but its implication was clear: a deliberate realignment of influence, favor, and power towards those seen as compliant. Charlotte, it seemed, was being positioned not just for the future, but for a redefined one that Camilla intended to shape. Anne left that room not only unsettled, but changed. She now understood that this wasn't just about guidance gone astray. It was a battle for a young girl's loyalty, identity, and legacy. But Anne's defiance only tightens the noose and forces her to seek help in the most unlikely of places, behind palace smiles and polished grace. Catherine had been living a quiet nightmare. Her daughter was slipping away, and she couldn't understand why, until Anne's confession broke the dam and sent waves through every maternal instinct Catherine possessed. Catherine had always trusted her instincts, and lately, those instincts had been ringing alarm bells. Charlotte had become harder to reach, not physically, but emotionally. Moments that once felt sacred between mother and daughter now carried an unspoken distance. The bedtime giggles were replaced by quiet nods. Questions were met with guarded replies, and every time Catherine tried to open a window into Charlotte's heart, she was met with a shadowed wall. It wasn't rebellion, it was something colder, more calculated, but Catherine couldn't name it until Anne did. When Anne, with that mixture of royal steel and trembling emotion, sat Catherine down and revealed everything she uncovered, the world shifted. It wasn't a slow realization, it was a tidal wave. Catherine listened in stunned silence as Anne described the governess's past, Camilla's private meetings, and the intentional isolation of her daughter. She felt the ground vanish beneath her pulse racing with rage and disbelief. How could this have happened under her own roof? But devastation didn't immobilize her. It fueled her. Catherine, remembering whispered warnings from Diana's old confidants, felt the fire of history flare to life again. She had always feared the crown's quiet machinery, but now it had crept too close. This time, it was her child. Together with Anne, she began a subtle but strategic plan to observe Charlotte's world from the inside. They didn't issue orders, they didn't stage scenes, they simply watched silently, carefully, persistently, and what they uncovered was deeply unsettling. Charlotte's diary, once a space of innocent wonder, had shifted in tone. There were strange affirmations, heavy lines about duty and self-sacrifice, and peculiar phrases like, "Legacy is louder than love." Catherine knew immediately these were not her daughter's words. Someone had planted them, fed them into her mind, one page at a time. The realization made her hands tremble. She confronted William in a rare outburst, her voice cracking not from weakness, but from terror. She begged him to intervene, to remove the governess, to confront Camilla, but William hesitated, torn between royal protocol and paternal instinct. His loyalty to his father, to the image of unity, clouded his resolve. It created a rift between them, one that neither wanted, but both now had to face. Catherine felt abandoned at the worst possible moment, not by William's love, but by his silence. And yet, even in her heartbreak, she steeled herself. There was no room left for waiting, no time for diplomacy. Her daughter was being reshaped before her very eyes, and the clock was ticking. With no time to lose, Anne and Catherine begin their own covert operation and soon uncover a disturbing trail. Who was this woman who suddenly appeared in Charlotte's life, praised by Camilla and protected by secrecy? What began as an innocent hire would soon explode into one of the most disturbing discoveries Anne had ever faced. Anne had long suspected that the governess wasn't who she appeared to be, but nothing could have prepared her for what surfaced when she began digging into the woman's past. Her real name wasn't listed on any of the official background checks. The references listed on her application, prestigious at first glance, led to dead ends. One former employer had passed away under unclear circumstances. Another flatly refused to comment, their tone tense, as if speaking her name came with consequences. Anne pushed further. What she unearthed sent chills down her spine. The governess had been previously associated with a controversial child development initiative, one quietly shut down after allegations of psychological manipulation surfaced. It had been dismissed publicly, cloaked under layers of bureaucracy, but behind the scenes, it was whispered about in elite circles. They called it the Crown's quiet moulding. And now, the The same methodology was being brought directly to Charlotte's nursery. Charlotte had begun parroting unsettling phrases. She would look Catherine in the eye and say things no child should be taught to believe. "Service to the crown comes before all," she repeated once. Another time, "Mothers are distractions when duty is calling." These weren't the words of a girl raised in warmth. They were rehearsed, implanted. Anne's horror deepened as she traced them back to the governess, whose lessons came wrapped in kindness but carried an icy, calculated core. When Anne confronted the woman, the governess remained calm, too calm. There was no denial, only a cryptic smile and one chilling sentence. "You should be careful where you wander, princess. Some corridors were never meant for your footsteps." It wasn't a warning, it was a threat, masked in civility but sharpened by intent. Shaken but not deterred, Anne kept pushing. Then came the call from someone she hadn't spoken to in years. A former royal staff member, once silenced and exiled under suspicious pretenses, reached out discreetly. They had once worked with the same woman back when the program was quietly running in Eastern Europe under the sponsorship of unnamed royal supporters. The staffer confirmed Anne's worst fears. The governess wasn't merely a tutor. She was part of an unofficial network, a coalition within the monarchy that believed in hardwiring loyalty into future heirs through emotional detachment and rewired identity. It was called the Conditioning Wing, and though not documented anywhere, it operated like a shadow government within palace walls. Select children, controlled environments, outcomes engineered for obedience, not love. Anne's blood ran cold. Charlotte wasn't just at risk, she was already under siege. The crown's most innocent member was being transformed from the inside out, with every bedtime story, every isolated conversation, every whispered affirmation designed to sever her from her roots and replant her under a new doctrine. But this wasn't just a family betrayal, it was institutional, a generational betrayal stitched into the seams of tradition, sanctioned by silence and protected by legacy. But before Anne can expose the truth, the leak inside the palace places everything and everyone at risk. Anne thought she had allies. But Balmoral, once her sanctuary, became the stage for a shocking betrayal that would shake her to the core and endanger, harlot, more than ever before. It was meant to be the turning point. After weeks of shadow investigations and sleepless nights, Anne believed she had gathered enough influence to finally challenge what was unfolding. She arranged a private summit at Balmoral, a place steeped in personal memory and ancestral weight. Carefully selecting 3 confidants she trusted beyond protocol, she planned to reveal the truth and strategize how to remove the governess without igniting scandal. The stakes were enormous, but Anne had hope. She believed the fortress of blood ties and loyalty could still be summoned. She underestimated how far the rot had already spread. On the day of the meeting, as Anne approached the drawing room, her heart stopped. Camilla was already inside. Not only had she arrived uninvited, but she was seated confidently, surrounded by individuals Anne had assumed were on her side. The atmosphere was cold, calculated. Anne realized too late that someone had leaked everything. What followed was not a meeting, it was a performance. Camilla seized the narrative effortlessly. She framed Anne's actions as erratic, emotional, even destabilizing. She spoke of royal unity, of maintaining calm during fragile times, and subtly hinted at Anne's supposed overreach. Then came the dagger. A pre-arranged photo opportunity was announced, forcing Anne into a staged event with Charlotte and the governess smiling alongside Camilla. Cameras were called in, and Anne, without time to resist, stood helplessly as the narrative flipped against her. It wasn't just a public embarrassment. It was an ambush crafted to paint her as out of touch, overprotective, and clinging to paranoia. Behind the lenses, Anne's eyes met Charlotte's. There was a flicker of confusion in the young girl's gaze, a silent plea. But Anne couldn't reach her. Not there, not then. Later that evening, Anne met with Rolls, believing he would finally see the danger. But he remained distant, avoiding eye contact, deflecting with phrases like, "for the good of the institution," and "you're letting emotion cloud the matter." When she pressed further, he handed her a sealed envelope, an official notice from palace advisors. It stated that Anne was to step back from any involvement with Charlotte's education or environment. It was a formal wall, a chilling act of silencing disguised as administrative necessity. Anne accepted it without a word, her jaw clenched, her dignity intact. But when the door closed behind her, the mask fell. She collapsed in her private quarters, not with rage, but with a grief so raw it shook her to tears. In a whisper barely louder than breath, she said the words that had haunted her for decades. I failed her, just like I failed Diana. But out of heartbreak comes resilience, and a sudden twist reignites Anne's hope. A single recording, a whispered conversation behind closed doors. It landed in Anne's hands by chance, but what it contained would flip the royal narrative on its head and blow Camilla's carefully crafted plan wide open. It came in the form of an unmarked envelope, slid under Anne's office door late at night. Inside, a flash drive, no note, no sender, just a single digital file labeled, "For her eyes only." Suspicion turned to urgency as she played it, expecting gossip at worst, slander at best. But what poured through the speakers left her breathless. The voices were unmistakable. Camilla and one of her most senior aides, speaking in low tones. The words were clear. They weren't discussing education or well-being. They were outlining a blueprint. The key, Camilla said calmly, is conditioning Charlotte early. If we wait too long, Catherine will cement her values. That cannot happen, the aide agreed. They spoke of loyalty reprogramming, of influence, networks of severing emotional dependence. The language wasn't just cold, it was calculated, methodical. This wasn't speculation, it was a confession. The timestamp confirmed it recorded just weeks prior, and didn't question its authenticity. She knew it was real. Someone inside the palace, perhaps driven by guilt or fear, had broken rank and handed her a smoking gun. She brought it straight to Catherine. No preamble, no explanation, just played the recording. The reaction was immediate. Catherine's hands flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than she had feared. It wasn't just about her daughter. It was about being erased as a mother, a protector, a guide. This wasn't merely about loyalty. It was about robbing Charlotte of her identity, piece by piece, behind closed doors. They both knew the truth had to reach William. This time, there would be no diplomatic dance. Anne insisted he hear it alone, uninterrupted. When he did, silence followed. Long, hollow silence. William didn't explode. He didn't shout, but the look on his face shattered something fundamental. The weight of legacy, family, and duty had always sat heavy on his shoulders, but now, with his daughter caught in the crossfire, he could no longer hide behind the palace walls. He promised to act, but to act quietly. This could not turn into a public war. The monarchy would not survive open bloodshed. Instead, a covert strategy was formed. Plans to remove the governess without fanfare, to transfer her discreetly, to dismantle the network from the inside, all while keeping the press blind to what was unraveling behind the palace gates. It was the first time in weeks Anne allowed herself to breathe. Finally, the tide was shifting. With William engaged, with undeniable proof in hand, they had leverage. Charlotte could be saved. The monarchy could correct its course. But the victor, was fragile, the path uncertain. And Camilla, cornered, exposed, was never one to retreat quietly. But even as the plan takes shape, Camilla makes one final move, one that nearly tears the family apart. With the stakes at their highest, the confrontation no one thought possible unfolded behind Buckingham Palace's grand doors. Anne, Catherine, and Camilla, 3 women, one truth, and a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. The air was heavy with unspoken rage as they entered the private chamber where Charles waited, silent and guarded. The tension was palpable. Anne wasted no time. She placed the audio recorder on the table and pressed play. As Camilla's own voice filled the room, laying bare her strategy of conditioning Charlotte, the silence turned into something darker. Camilla's expression faltered for the first time. She denied it, of course she did, tried to cast doubt on her recording's authenticity. But the timestamps were irrefutable. The aide's voice, the phrasing, The intent, it was all too precise. Anne didn't shout. She didn't even raise her voice. But her words cut like glass. "You crossed a line," she said coldly. "You didn't just interfere, you tried to reshape a child." For once, Charles couldn't hide behind regal neutrality. The evidence was undeniable, and Anne's fury was justified. Camilla cracked. Her voice rose, no longer polished, no longer rehearsed. She accused Anne of sabotaging her, of nursing an ancient rivalry, of jealousy cloaked in righteousness. She claimed she only ever wanted to protect the monarchy, to prepare Charlotte for the burdens ahead. But her justifications rang hollow. The mask had slipped, and what remained was desperation. Catherine, unable to hold back her anguish, stood trembling. Her voice, soft but firm, broke through the chaos. "She is my daughter," she cried. "Not a project, not a legacy. A child." The room fell silent. Again, even Charles looked away. In that moment, all the layers of royalty, duty, and image melted into something painfully human. The mother, the aunt, the manipulator, each revealed by truth. What followed was not victory, but necessity. A compromise was brokered, not one anyone truly celebrated, but one that would protect Charlotte. Camilla would step back, formally and quietly, from all educational decisions concerning the young princess. The governess would be reassigned under a different title, and her influence dismantled brick by brick. There would be no public fallout, no statement, no blame. The monarchy would spin the narrative its own way, but the internal lines had shifted. Camilla accepted the terms, but not without the cold stare of resentment that promised the wound would fester. As the meeting ended, Anne and Catherine shared no words. None were needed. They had stared into the abyss and returned with Charlotte still intact, but the palace, now fractured behind polished walls, would never be the same. Camilla had been cornered, but not conquered. The crown had yielded, but only just. And beneath the calm exterior, another force, quieter, colder, was already beginning to stir. But while the storm appeared to settle, another brewing force was already rising from the ashes of conflict. She may only be a child, but Princess Charlotte carries the legacy of queens past and the resilience of women who refused to be broken. What came next wasn't just a survival story, it was the beginning of something new. In the days following the confrontation, a quiet shift began to take place. There were no press releases, no tabloid leaks, only a subtle reordering of palace affairs. The governess, whose presence once loomed like a shadow, was quietly reassigned under the guise of a diplomatic necessity, abroad. No explanation was offered publicly, and no questions were encouraged internally. In her place, a new figure entered Charlotte's world, one chosen by Catherine and vetted with meticulous care. Someone who valued nurturing over molding, who understood that guidance must never come at the expense of innocence. It didn't take long for the changes to show. Charlotte, though still guarded, began to show signs of emerging from the fog. She spoke more, laughed louder, and even returned to the small rituals she once shared with her mother: bedtime stories, morning walks, and quiet whispers of curiosity and wonder. Anne visited more often now, not with an investigative eye, but with a watchful heart. The bond between her and Charlotte deepened in unexpected ways. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden alone, Charlotte reached into her coat pocket and handed Anne a small bracelet, simple, handmade, with uneven beads and string. Attached was a folded note scrawled in Charlotte's own careful handwriting. "Thank you for fighting." Anne didn't speak. She didn't have to. In that moment, the weight of everything, the sleepless nights, the betrayals, the confrontation, lifted just enough for her to exhale. It was a reminder that the struggle hadn't been in vain, that even the smallest voices understood the power of being protected. Camilla, for her part, retreated into the background. She cancelled appearances, refused. Her presence in royal engagements dwindled to near invisibility, a calculated silence that said everything and nothing at once. No apology ever came. But her absence was its own confession, and though no one spoke of it aloud, the royal household knew something had shifted, not in titles or duties, but in influence. The grip she once held had loosened. Anne, though forever changed by what she had witnessed and endured, found a quiet peace. She had not undone the past, but she had safeguarded the future, and in doing so, she awed a piece of the monarchy's heart that had nearly been lost. As she watched Charlotte dance across the gravel path beside Catherine, she allowed herself the rarest of expressions, a smile. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just relieved. And so, behind the gilded walls of monarchy, one thing became clear. The battle for the soul of the crown was far from over. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.